ready to go. It is wonderful to see everybody here. I was actually getting a bit nervous when I see all the faces and all the names popping up here. I guess we are all a bit unused to seeing each other and communicating with a lot of people here. But I'm happy that we are here and that we can do this. My name is Nilsson, and I am in the board of WFAD. And I am, as I said, very happy that we can do this. WFAD is a member organization, and I think most of you are members of WFAD. And if you are not, I welcome you all to join us in our very lovely family of WFAD organizations working in one way or another around illicit drugs. We had webinars before, but we had maybe a bit of a pause in that. But I hope that we can continue to do this kind of webinars, to go in depth and find other ways of meeting. Since we are a worldwide organization, it's not, even though right now with special circumstances with Corona, we still need to find ways to meet across the borders. So I'm happy to do this today. And one thing that I would like to stress is that we all welcome if you have ideas for webinars that you want us to do around topics, or if you have special ideas about good stuff that you are doing that you want to share. Please send us an email or contact us. You have many different ways of contacting us, so we can continue to do this lovely ways of gathering around webinars. We are quite some people here today. Regina here will mute you all. She's waving there right now. And in order for us to, be able to listen to the person who is speaking. There are a couple of ways for you to ask for the floor. Either you can use the chat. You can also raise your hand if you find that way. So please use that and we welcome all questions in the chat, and we will try to deal with them. We are set up to do a webinar for 1 hour. We will keep that and finish at 2 o'clock. But we will also keep this open if you want to continue the discussion afterwards. For you who have time, I mean, you're perfectly welcome to hang around a bit after to do what we usually do over a coffee, maybe after a seminar. So please do that. We will send out a short survey after, just to ask if you have any comments, and we will also ask if you have any other ideas for webinars in the future. But you can also, of course, send us a normal email on info@wfad.se. So please do that. And if you have any other comments or questions after the webinar that you come up with tomorrow morning when you wake up, send us an email and we will forward that to the speakers, so try to answer it ourselves. You can send it to Regina, to me, or to the info email at WFAD. Today we will talk about recovery, and more specifically around recovery cities. We have a few excellent speakers here to share their experience and knowledge. I am extremely happy to have you all here and that you're willing to be part of this. And I will not speak for any longer right now. I will hand over the floor to Mulka, who will lead us through this hour and keep track of everybody. So Mulka, please, the word is yours.
Thank you, Linda, and hello everybody. My name is Mulka Nisic and I work with WFAD members Celebrate Recovery as a regional project coordinator in the Balkans. And today it gives me a great pleasure to welcome our first speaker, Professor David Best. He's a professor of criminology at Department of Criminology at Derby University and visiting associate professor at Australian National University, I think. Yes.
Yeah.
And David holds multiple degrees, also a PhD in psychology of addiction, and he authored 7 books and more than 200 publications, book chapters and papers. But his current research is around recovery pathways, recovery capital, recovery and resistance, and also building recovery cities. And thank you, David, so much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
And I would like to start this, your speech with, actually it will be kind of an interview, form of interview. And the first question I want to ask is, in your opinion, what is recovery and why is it so important?
Okay, recovery is essentially the process of people achieving a number of different things. So abstinence or sobriety is a big part of this, but it's by no means the only part. So recovery is generally thought of as having three core pillars. One is about general health and well-being, so generally improving physical, psychological health. The second is about abstinence or controlled use of substances, and it's quite contentious. But I think the evidence is really clear that for the vast majority of people, at least some period of complete abstinence is a necessity for recovery. And the third is citizenship, because one of the things we know is that for people to recover, they have to become active. They have to become actively involved in their own activities, in their community, and frequently the key kind of milestones of moving to recovery are successful job, safe housing free from threat, and some kind of a transition to positive relationships and social group involvement. So it's complex, and it's a process that takes place over time. So recovery doesn't happen overnight, and there's a common mistake that when people achieve abstinence, they have recovered. They haven't. From that, that's really the starting point of the recovery journey. We generally argue that it typically takes about 5 years from that point till somebody achieves what we would call stable recovery, which is the ability to self-sustain recovery without external support. What the corollary of that is that over that 5-year window, people will need supports, and the whole of the recovery movement, culminating in recovery cities, is about what those supports should look like.
Definitely. So this idea of recovery cities, where does it come from? It really excites me because when I first heard about the idea of recovery cities, I was fascinated, and I had never heard of it before, and it kind of stuck a chord in me. And I wonder if you can explain a little bit more about the idea and what you mean when you say recovery cities.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it starts from the assumption that only a very small number of people can do recovery themselves. What's called natural recovery. They recover without any external help or support. For the majority of people, recovery is a social process. So it requires assistance from family, from friends, from communities, and crucially from communities, because part of the recovery process is the capacity and ability to access community resources, access to jobs, to houses, to mutual aid groups, to recovery groups. And one of the things I think that we've learned is that what typically happens is people have to build the resources for recovery over time, and we call that recovery capital. And recovery capital is both something that exists inside people, but also something that happens between people. It's something that's a social process. And there are areas, cities, neighborhoods, which are more receptive to recovery than others. And we can learn about what those fertile grounds are, and we can try and promote them. And really the start of the idea of recovery city was that there are some places where there are more access to visible recovery champions, better treatment services, more opportunities for housing, for jobs, and less stigma and exclusion. So less laws stopping people reintegrate, that are more likely to enable recovery to be completed and to be successfully transitioned. Yeah. One of the things that's important about the idea of a recovery city, though, is that we can start to translate those ideas so that it's not just about addiction recovery, it's much more about inclusivity, and particularly now when we're talking in the middle of the coronavirus pandemic, we can start to see how vulnerable, isolated groups can benefit from some of the things we know about addiction recovery, about the importance of positive social networks, the importance of belonging, the importance of a positive self-identity and connections to people who can help you along the way. And that really started the idea that a recovery city is an inclusive city, not just for addiction, but for all kinds of excluded, marginalized and vulnerable groups.
And can you also tell us more about the core principles of recovery cities?
So it starts from some basic assumptions. The assumptions are that people will typically have limited resources and supports to start with, either because they never had them or because they lost them over their addiction journey. They need to access resource. And that process is an interpersonal process, that it takes groups, institutions, organizations, and individuals. And that one of the core concepts is that in communities, there are assets out there that can be tapped into and accessed to enable recovery pathways. And one of the core underlying processes is the question of how do we access recovery pathways and how can we mobilize those resources in communities to make that process more likely. And doing so, to return to the idea of recovery capital, there's two different ideas happen there. One, the first thing is that as people recover, their recovery capital grows. But as lots of people recover, so the recovery capital in a location grows. Because as a very famous academic called John Braithwaite once said, recovery capital and social capital aren't like financial capital. So with financial capital, as we sadly all know, you have money, you spend it, there's less of it at the end. But social capital doesn't work like that. When you deploy and use your social capital, there's more of it at the end. So as recovery capital grows in individuals, so it grows in the communities. And that really is the fundamental principle. So it relies on the idea of there being assets that need to be mobilized. And to mobilize those assets, we need a core group of people called connectors, community connectors. And they're in every community, because I've done this work now in different continents. I do it currently in Australia, in New Zealand, in the UK, and we had the pleasure of doing it in Belgrade towards the end of last year. And it's about how do you identify those natural connecting champions who know people, who know assets, who can create those kind of connections. And I think the last fundamental and underlying principle is there is generally a huge amount of goodwill that could be tapped into in communities, that can be mobilized to make cities and communities more accessible, more equitable, and more fair places for people attempting these journeys.
Yeah, I also had a question about examples of innovation in this approach. Do you have some models already?
Yeah, I mean, I guess there are at least 4 good examples of where this is happening. So the 4 cities, and you may want to talk about what's going on in the Balkan region because the meeting we had was really exciting. But I think one of the best examples was the visit we did to Gothenburg. So we went to Gothenburg to launch the Recovery Cities Initiative, led by Linda Nilsson. We visited one particular area and looked at the opportunities there. We then hosted a city centre event in the Ullevi Stadium in the centre of the city. And that prompted the generation of a group of people, and it was incredibly well attended. There was a huge level of enthusiasm. A number of people volunteered to become community connectors and have started taking that forward. And there have been recovery celebrations in Gothenburg. And likewise in Ghent in Belgium. And the other place I guess I wanted to talk about as a really good example is close to me is Doncaster in England, where we've had 2 big things that have come out of this. One has been a recovery college, a kind of training support event for both peer mentors and champions and people working in the recovery area in the UK. And the second is the Recovery Games. And the Recovery Games really captures the spirit of recovery cities. Because the idea of so it's a kind of sports day event where teams from recovery communities from all over the UK gather in Doncaster and they take part in a range of sporting activities. And the point is not about the winning. The point is about taking part. They're like recovery walks because we aim to do a number of different things with these. The aim is partly around celebrating people's own recovery journeys. It's partly about creating new, warm, positive connections among people in recovery. It's partly also showing local populations that people can and do recover, to challenge stigmatizing attitudes and perceptions. It's also about for people who are in addiction to say, this is possible. You may not think it's possible, but look at these people having fun, getting on with things, enjoying themselves. This is possible for you as much as it's possible for them. So it's kind of the whole point about recovery cities is to have big events that effectively bring people together, create a positive social identity for recovery, challenge stigma and exclusion. And it does it in two ways. And I think the event in Belgrade, like the event in Gothenburg, like events in our other places where we do this, Dublin and Doncaster, has really been around saying, how do we get both the grassroots activity to be connected in a meaningful way, and how do we link it to strategic leaders in communities so that there's both a top-down pressure and a bottom-up pressure that meets in the middle. And that the attempt of that model is to effectively create positive human connections and bring people together.
Yes, so let's just say that maybe some cities would like to join, and what would the city have to do to become a recovery city?
Well, we will attempt to support any city as much as we possibly can. We are still a really fledgling organization. So from our point of view, we want to be flexible, because I think the first thing to say is, this is not a McDonald's franchise. We're not going to say, here are the activities that everybody has to do. What we want to do is to say, identify your own assets and strengths. And we will send, if anyone is interested and you email any of us, we'll send you the overview and documents and the published research on recovery cities. And that will give you the guidance on how to do it and what to do. But more importantly, I think we would work with you to say, what are the natural assets you have? Who are your natural champions, and how do you bring them forth? So I know that, for example, there was an initial idea for both Ghent and Gothenburg to try and replicate the recovery games that we have in the UK. But it transitioned in Gothenburg into something else, a kind of recovery festival event. And that's good, because that effectively fits with what your city does and what it has, and you want to build on those events. So I think our view would be the aim should be 4 activities or events a year. And at least one of them should be a kind of launch event where you try and mobilize and engage people to become connectors for you and to mobilize and free up assets. But what the others are really is just a mixture of where you tap into the existing resources. So things like conferences are good, but also to support, in the spirit of recovery, they are things that should be held in public spaces that are accessible and available to everybody, that allow people to have fun and allow people to see that recovery is a positive thing. And that can effectively enrich the lives of all the people who take part. That's key. And ultimately what we want a recovery city to be is a vibrant part of the well-being and the overall cultural capital of whatever city it takes part in.
Yes. So what is inclusive about this approach?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that, because I will frequently change my language from talking about recovery cities to inclusive cities to recovery cities to inclusive cities, and that's deliberate. And part of the reason is that there are really 2 primary purposes which hugely overlap. In the first instance, the aim is to both celebrate people in your local community or city who have recovered or are recovering, and to mobilize them to help other people to do the same. So point 1 is about addictions and addiction recovery. But much more importantly and much more broadly than that is, how do we then generalize that to say, how do we make the city a better place? As I've said, social capital spreads. There's a contagion of hope. And our aim is to say, as people become better connected and as hope generates and manifests, so we then want to say, how do we then translate that to other individuals and other groups so that potentially we could target, because the model is transferable. It would apply equally to people with mental health problems, with physical disabilities, with learning difficulties, asylum seekers, refugees, any marginalized, excluded group. The whole principle of saying, what are the assets? How do we mobilize the assets? How do we connect people to those assets? And how do we utilize that to create this notion of collective community capital where everybody benefits? And one of the things we've known for a long time from public health science is that the more groups people belong to, the better their health, the better their well-being. So for at least 10 years now, we have known from meta-analytic research that becoming connected to new groups and new activities is better for your health and well-being than any one of losing weight, stopping smoking, or stopping drinking. Connectedness, all forms of human connectedness, are absolutely at the heart of the model. And as we're seeing now, with incredibly innovative things people are doing online, the notion that crisis can provoke that collective spirit and can change people's lives and make people's lives stronger is crucial to what we want to do.
Yeah, that's kind of what you said in one conference, Goya principle.
Yeah, Goya principle is, I'm afraid, not a particularly sophisticated principle, but the idea is, and it applies to clients in recovery, because Goya stands for get off your arse, as in the Spanish painter Francisco Goya. Now,
Yeah.
why is that important? Because the evidence is really clear that when people start doing things, their well-being goes up. Their physical health, their mental health, their quality of life, it all goes up. But it doesn't just apply to clients, it applies to workers as well. One of the things that in my own training, I trained as a psychologist in a large teaching hospital in South London, that we would sit behind the desk and dispense wisdom to people, and we were astonished that very few people ever got any better. Because while therapy has a place, on its own, it's completely inadequate. We need to get out there into communities and mobilize those communities to link people into those things that are helpful for them. 12-step groups, therapeutic communities, smart recovery groups, but not just things like that. Sport, recreation, education, training, employment. You know, for lots and lots of people, the journey to recovery is partly about discovering they're not stupid. So somewhere in the recovery journey, they go back to college and university, and they thrive and they excel and they do really well at these things. For other people, they discover they've got musical or artistic or sporting gifts. And that's really why recovery is not, in this world, isn't about going back to where you started. It's really about growth, personal growth. So the whole notion of recovery is to create a city that maximizes the opportunity for vulnerable and excluded people to achieve their potential.
So how do we build on what is already there?
Well, the first question is, you have to find out what is already there. And I guess I learned my lesson from this in Australia. So I was invited by 2 judges in Southeast Melbourne to come and do some work with them on motivational interviewing, basically because they had a group of young drinkers and drug users who were repeatedly before the courts. And I said to them, what you need isn't motivational interviewing. What you need is stuff for them to do, meaningful pro-social activities that changes how they see themselves, the groups they belong to, and what they want to achieve and aspire to. So what we did was that the judges, Greg and Pauline, organised a series of morning teas in the courthouse in Dandenong, which is a fairly deprived area of Southeast Melbourne. And they invited a whole host of people. And the formula we tend to use is we invite organisations from employment, training and education as the first cluster, recovery groups, so things like Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, Smart Recovery. We invite people from sport, recreation and art groups, and especially early in recovery, that physical well-being is so important. Getting exercise, getting fit, getting healthy. So things like cookery clubs are perfect. Yoga, mindfulness, anything that allows people to do those basic things of physical well-being and psychological well-being. And then volunteering, because the other crucial part of this is not everybody's going to step straight into a job, but giving something back and committing to that spirit of giving something back is crucial. So in essence, the starting point is to say, who are the people?
No. Sign out and use your Gmail to sign in. I should clear the Zoom's data.
Okay.
Oh, hello?
Someone joined and didn't mute.
Okay, sorry. So yeah, the 4 groups of things: education, training and employment, sport, recreation and art, recovery groups, and volunteering and community involvement activities. You want to host an event and invite as many of the local organizations involved in those things as possible. And that might well involve a number of things like local churches. because they will frequently already be doing a lot of that work. The point about inclusive cities is not to reinvent the wheel. We're not claiming this is a radical new idea of things that nobody's ever done before. The point is about how they're linked and coordinated. So the key event, as we've had in Doncaster and as we've had in Gothenburg and as we've held in Belgrade, is then to start to say, how do we get these people to link to each other, to create pathways into their community resources? And those resources will typically take three forms. There'll be key individuals, there'll be informal groups and associations, and there'll be structured organizations. The aim is to mobilize those things to allow people to make significant changes over time. And what you also find is that some people will come and never come back. They'll just come once and they'll not be interested. But the people who are engaged and are interested, the group of them becomes a new asset in itself. It becomes a kind of rallying cry and uniting force for people who are committed to this vision. So actually mobilizing resources, you create a new resource. And the most important part of that resource is you identify key people who share your vision, who will work with you. And that's how you build on what's already there, not by replacing it or replicating it, but by coordinating it and mobilizing it. And then crucially, what you then have to do is work out, how do you build those bridges? How do you build those connections to community activities and community events? Because as we know, people in the early stages of addiction and lots of excluded and marginalized groups have very low self-esteem, they have low self-belief, and they struggle to engage externally. So what you have to do is find people who will, and we call this the principle of assertive linkage. You have to find people who can positively, enthusiastically, and support everybody to get involved in those groups. Because bear in mind, and this all comes back to the starting point, which is this is not a replacement for specialist drug and alcohol treatment. This is something that builds on beyond that. This is something that supplements, because from the moment somebody gets clean, all that acute clinical work is done. We have 5 years where the person needs to get effectively integrated and engaged. We know that in the first year after somebody detoxes, the likelihood of relapse is more than 50%. If they make it to 5 years of continuous sobriety, the likelihood of relapse is 14%. What's the point of supporting people in recovery journey is to get them to that point. And you do that not by medicines or talking therapies, but you do that by effective community support that allows people to build those internal personal resources.
This partly also answers my next question, but what do you think, what impact will recovery cities have on addiction recovery and more generally?
Yeah, I mean, when I started studying recovery, and over the course of the last 10 to 15 years, I've collected about 2,500 recovery stories in the UK and Australia and America and New Zealand. And one of the things that's always struck me is how many people have to find their own pathway because there is nothing out there. The point about recovery cities is firstly to ensure that recovery is visible, vibrant and accessible, and that as early as possible recovery can reach out to you, that you don't have to feel stigmatized and ashamed, because the whole point of these events is to challenge some of that exclusion and stigma, but also to allow the possibility for to say, well, we can build on this model and we can start to say, actually the whole community can become engaged in this much more inclusive thing. That people will feel better about themselves, regardless of whether they have an addiction problem, as cities grow and develop that inclusive quality. Because it's also important to remember that when one person is addicted, typically 5 to 6 will suffer. Children, partners, parents, neighbors. And that the whole point is neither addiction nor recovery are things that exist inside one person. By challenging some of these exclusions and stigmas and building pathways to recovery, effectively, it creates prevention by providing early exit points on addiction careers, but it also provides that safety and support. And I think it's really important to say, this is about when people are ready for recovery journeys. This is not instead of treatment, and it's certainly not instead of any of those kind of early harm reduction interventions. This is a way of supporting people who commit themselves to this pathway to support them to achieve the goals they themselves will say they want.
That's wonderful. And in closure, I want to just ask you, how do we join?
Okay, well, contact any of us. This is an incredibly exciting initiative. So Mulka, Linda, myself, any of us would be more than happy to talk to you about how you become involved in this. Because we also are a learning organization. We are still at the point of saying, we will support you, but we want to learn from you. Crucially from us, and sorry, this is going slightly off the subject, but this is a strengths-based approach. We want to celebrate what is good. We do not want to sit wringing our hands about what's terrible and what's wrong and how badly things go. And so one of the things we know about having these kind of activities and events is they generate hope. And all of you have heard me say numerous times, as well as Goya, there's one other critical acronym we need to be aware of, which is CHIME. And it applies to professionals every bit as much as it applies to people in recovery. Positive connections to groups that are filled with hope, aspiration, and a radius of trust generate opportunities for positive identity, meaning, and empowerment. So, and for me, the whole point of this is, if people aren't interested, if people don't want to recover or don't support this, that's fine. But for us, it's a way to gather like-minded people together to build that fuel and that sense of hope and possibility, that possibility of not only transforming individuals, but transforming families and communities. And it's a big, bold vision, and that's why we've set this up. So how do you join? Just contact any of us. We'll do everything we can to support you in this pathway. This is a really exciting journey we are on, and I hope a couple of the other people involved will tell their own stories about how this has worked for them.
Thank you, David. And I know I'm speaking also on my and Linda's behalf that this work for Recovery Cities was really inspiring and exciting, and it just grows.
Yeah.
So
I think for your event in Belgrade, the event that you and Boro organised in Belgrade, for the event that Linda organised in Gothenburg, the most pleasurable part of this from my perspective has been that sense of generating energy, enthusiasm, commitment. And for anyone who is thinking, well, we do a lot of these things already, give this a go, have this kind of launch event, because you'll be astonished at the amount of energy and enthusiasm that results from it. So thank you very much, Mulka. That has been a real pleasure.
Thank you. And also, who wants to ask any questions who has any questions for David can write to Regina, and we'll try to answer at the end or by email. And now our next speaker is Alexander Zugic. He is president and one of the founders of Christian Organization for Support and Prevention and Rehabilitation of Substance Abuse. Their name is Exodus, actually Izlazak in Serbian, and since 2008 he has been actively involved in supporting people in recovery, and his work is mainly based on his personal experience of addiction and recovery. So Alexander will tell us more about why resocialization is such a crucial and important part of the recovery process. We heard David's experience and point of view, and coming from the UK, where recovery is in local communities, it's possible, it's visible, it's supported, and I think maybe more than anywhere else in the world. But what is the situation on the ground in Serbia, where lots of people are still going to rehabs for many years and they come back with no job, with poor education, no connection and support, and also stigma is stopping people to successfully integrate back to society and enjoy their rights. So Alexander, you have the floor.
Yeah. Thank you, Mulka. Dear friends, I wish you a good day to all of you, and the success in everything you're doing in these days. And these days are quite complicated. And I wish you also, for you and for me personally, to pass through this period as easily as possible it is. I have to say that I'm quite positively surprised by this kind of response, because yesterday in the morning the registration was closed for this meeting, and I said, wow, wow. So it is good. It's good. I was quite positively surprised. As Mulka said, I'm a representative of the NGO Izlazak, and I have to say that I'm currently in the mandatory self-isolation because I was at Boro's wedding, and I have to pay a big price for that now. It's going to be 28 days in a self-isolation. I cannot get out from the house anywhere on the street. And so I apologize in advance if some of my kids just jump inside. So I'm pretty stuck up in the house in this last period. Today I will briefly say about the organization itself and what we are specific about, and something a little bit about recovery and social reintegration, as well as multi-sectoral meetings that we have done in the cooperation with our National Office for Drugs here in Serbia. I don't know how much time do I have. You said about hour all together, yeah?
Yes, but we'll probably need to stay a little bit longer.
Because, yeah. So I will try to be short as much as possible. Anyway, NGO Izlazak is an organization that is specific by one thing, is that we were founded basically on the initiative of a group of recovering addicts. Most of the founders, including myself, after completing the programs in the therapeutic community, we have encountered ourselves, we found ourselves in front of one big question. And that big question was, what now? Namely, we had one great desire to do something good for the others. We were quite enthusiastic, and when I look back now, I think we were not at all aware that at that time, helping others, we were basically helping to ourselves, especially in this maintaining abstinence by giving ourselves some higher goal and some higher purpose in the things we are doing. And as you know, in the most countries in this region, especially in, I have to share some screen, sorry for presentation. Okay. And in most countries of our region, the only services provided to the people addicted to the drugs until 2000 were brief treatments at state institutions, or to be precise, hospitalization, which was mostly limited to a medical detoxification. As we all know, establishing abstinence is something that most of people who use drugs want, but not nearly what is necessary to their recovery process. In the year 2000, first therapeutic community started with providing long-term treatment services, which was significantly better, but it opened up a number of new questions that needed to be answered and numerous problems and obstacles that needed to be addressed in a proper way. Namely, after the treatment, as you all know, people in recovery faces a problem which, if not adequately addressed, lead to relapse. Due to the mistrust, the broken families, family relationships, and the consequences of earlier life, people in the recovery process are left without adequate support and assistance to start a new life. Many of them are without primary or high school education, lack the knowledge and skills to be competitive in the labor market. Also, a large percentage had problems with the law and were serving prison sentences, which further complicates their employment. And despite positive experiences during treatment and a strong desire to stay sober, small number have the inner strength to move on to a new life without the support of others. So, when we talk about the others, we think all this capital that David mentioned, when we talk about family, the friends, employers, service providers, and basically whole local community. My colleagues and me, the founders of NGO Izlazak, we decided at one point to give our small, I can say small, modest, but at that moment it was a pioneering contribution in overcoming this shortcoming in the support system. Basically, at that moment in Serbia, nobody was doing the things that we are doing. Nobody was dealing with this resocialization and reintegration. Nobody in Serbia at that moment. So we have, since we didn't have any kind of funds, nobody was hearing, seeing this problem as relevant at this moment. we have started several businesses and developing social entrepreneurship programs through which we have started employing people in recovery. And as you know, the three pillars of social reintegration are housing, education, and employment. And one of the main problems in the social reintegration is unemployment. Namely, most addicts enter the world of addiction very early, so they drop out of school and do not have the education and skill required for the employment, which, in addition to the stigmatization of the society and the current level of unemployment in our countries, makes it a fundamental problem when they are seeking for employment. Also, we have started an environment that will not, we have created basically the environment that will not encourage them to take drugs again, but will help them to identify lifelong satisfaction that does not include all self-destructive habits and behaviors. The old environment in which these people have lived before often does not meet their needs. And as I said, since our countries do not have developed social reintegration programs or any kind of aftercare support, people in recovery remain on the margins of society and in danger of returning to their old ways of life. And traditional treatment is more focused on pharmacotherapy and psychosocial outcomes. However, social reintegration scope is wider and is the most significant aspect of full recovery from drug dependence. And one of the things I was thinking in this last period is how we need to move, and I'm talking about the region basically here that we are functioning. We have to move the complete narrative from one emotional to the practical and pragmatic level. What I mean by that, in our advocacy, we constantly want to induce a positive emotion in people because it is necessary for destigmatization. However, there are very few or no research among stakeholders and policymakers at local and regional level when it comes to the cost effectiveness of such drug policies and treatments that we currently have here in the region. And if we want to protect people in recovery from social exclusion and support them in their integration, we cannot neglect the social needs they have. Why? Well, basically it's like a cow that gives a lot of milk, but in the end it kicks the bucket and spills all the milk. Why I'm saying that? That's why if we do not have clarity on the necessity of investing in recovery-oriented system of care, in this case with an emphasis on reintegration, well, all the benefits and the gains achieved during the treatment will be lost. Everything that we have done and achieved with the people in the treatment, if we don't, these aftercare programs will be lost. And Choose Recovery Program project is launched back in 2015 with very modest funds. I have to say very modest when we started, and it was a one-year project, and now is going to become developing project basically. Now it's going to be 2022 is going to be 7 years of this project. And when I say we started with very modest funds, we were able to these funds to map all the actors working in this field in 3 countries of the region, as well to make a needs assessment. And in 2017, Office for Drugs of the Government of the Republic of Serbia decided to support us in the implementation of this project. And based on the earlier need assessment and considering many years of experience in this work, as well as the shortcomings in the support system, essentially our organization was founded as a response to the shortcomings in the system. We have realized that we need to make a change and to improve services for people with addiction problems, with a focus on people from rural parts, as well as connecting all actors within community through multi-sectoral collaboration and networking to support the persons in the process of recovering from addiction through, let's say, joint efforts to bring them to their place of the, we like to use these expressions, to the place of their full potential. And in this effort in 2017, the Office for Drug decided to support us and started to organize joint multi-sectoral meetings throughout whole Serbia. And this cooperation was basically mutual benefit. On one side, the office had the opportunity to make its own assessment of the situation on the field, on the ground, as well as to gather information and the data they all needed basically for creating the next national strategy and action plan. And yet, from the other side, we were able to develop recovery ecology through all Serbia basically. And in this time, I have to find just a little bit. I borrowed this slide from a colleague from Office for Drugs, and two of them are here today, and I send our regards to them. And this time, in this period, in the last 3 years, we were able to organize 12 multi-sectoral meetings for 14 administrative districts within 77 municipalities. And on this meeting, we had 250 representatives of the various actors, directly or indirectly dealing with supply and demand reduction. So why am I saying this? Basically, I was quite proud on the things that we have done in this last 3 years, because we are developing these old things that David was talking about, basically. And now, through all of this work that we had in the last 3 years, now we have some small base point. I have to say small because it is very hard work and long-term work, making these recovery cities and the idea of the recovery basically in our countries. Because Boro will probably talk more about that. Some concept of recovery in our region is not much familiar like in some countries that we are working also through World Federation. So basically this is short from me. So if somebody has some questions later, I will be at your disposal. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alexander. And it's always a pleasure to hear about our project from someone else. And before I give the floor to our next speaker and the president of my organization, Boro Goic, I just want to say that I have had the pleasure of being involved in the Balkan Recovery Movement and Choose Recovery project for the past 5 years, together with Linda and Regina and Boro and Alexander. And there have been some amazing successes and also many challenges along the way. But Boro will tell us more about the actual project and about some of our activities, which are actually our response to identified needs in the Balkan societies. And also he will present the research and data that we have gathered over the past years. And Boro has also actively been involved in recovery field since 2002, and he has established our NGO Celebrate Recovery with the aim to help individuals and families recover from drug addiction. And he's also active on grassroots and also on drug policy, and he's the chair of Recovered Users Network, which is a unique platform that represents the voice and rights of previous and recovered users. And Boro, good afternoon from the other room.
Oh, hello, and it's my pleasure to speak in front of you, in front of screen basically, which is a little bit different than when you speak on conferences or on some meetings. I think sometimes expressions, you know, and everything gives a more sensitivity of what you are talking about, but I will try to be brief and to speak about several things that are connected with this, what David said and what Alexander said. But before I start or try to answer on some questions that Mulka will ask me, the difficult situation in which whole world is in the moment is showing us, in my opinion, a little bit just to say about that, how we lived in the phase of addiction. So when we compare this time and where everybody is in some kind of quarantine, where everybody doesn't have a freedom to do what they want, where everybody doesn't have, let's say, to fulfill their wishes in the moment. So you cannot now have a wish to travel somewhere and do it. Somehow, when I speak with the people, I feel that like some dignity, they are feeling they lose dignity, you know. And now, when we are thinking about addiction and how those people feel during that period, I think we can compare it somehow. Because inside those addiction years, it's really that you cannot do whatever you want and wish, because addiction is harder. You don't have a freedom to do whatever you feel that you are losing your dignity. So maybe when we are speaking with the ordinary people and ask them how they feel, you know, I'm comparing that they need to have a sensibility for the people in addiction, not only during this period. We should be sensitive about everything and responsible, but after this period, you know, because I think they came through also similar time, like what a lot of people who face the addiction problem been through most of their lives. So it's just a small comparison. So please, Mulka, continue with what you want me to speak.
Well, I wanted you to tell us something about what is your view on recovery in general and on recovery-oriented systems of care. We heard David, but I want to also our audience to hear more about this from you.
Look, this is a very good question. And I think when we are coming to the different countries and different regions, we will find different answers on that question. So basically here in Balkan region, when we are involved, me, Alexander, and different organizations too, and when we speak about all the system was never built that people who are entering in the system came out integrated into the society. So basically, David spoke about what recovery is. It is abstinence, it is well-being. But basically, when we talk about systems in Balkan, we heard a lot about rehabilitation, or we heard about abstinence that is sometimes going against what system is giving them. So basically, when we speak about recovery-oriented systems of care, they are here in Balkans absolutely been not existing before 5 or 6 years. And when I speak about recovery-oriented systems of care, then I'm thinking about the people are entering into some process where drug use is less drug use, and they are entering in some process where through the different actors, through the different professionals, stakeholders, NGOs, helpers, they will sustainably walk through that path. But that path needs to have a goal. It needs to have an end. So a recovery process is the long process. And we heard from David, and we have evidence. And we have evidence that more than 5 years people we can call recovered. And they have a less chance to fall again into the addiction. But the question is, when we are talking here in Balkan region with all professionals, what is our common goal? When we are talking about addicts, is our common goal only to reduce harm caused by drug abuse, or is our common goal to eventually, if possible, integrate those people into society? So this is the last goal. And Alexander said, resocialization should be and is the last part of this process. So basically, through the project that we are here dealing with in the last 5 years, and we will continue in next 3 years to do it, we are trying to establish recovery-oriented systems of care. And this is not easy. Our target group are not, when we are talking about projects, our target group are not only people who have problems with drug abuse. Our target groups are professionals. And when we've been talking with professionals in the last 5 years, we've been not only talking with them like how we can work together. We wanted to see what kind of work they are providing. And then we came back to this chime: connectiveness, hope, identity, meaningful, and empowerment. And this is something what should be like some measures of if some institution or NGO or public institution or methadone treatment or rehabilitation center is providing. And when we've been talking on the individual meetings, on the multi-sectorial meetings with the different professionals, we've been like somehow thinking what kind of connectiveness they are providing. With those services, are they providing some empowerment to the people? If they are not doing that, nobody will develop toward the recovery process. So it was very important for us. We didn't say, okay, this institution, public institution that is providing methadone treatment is really isolated and it's not providing time, and we said we will not cooperate with them. No, we just recognize that, and then we are trying to establish as much as possible common goals, but common goals that will not be like how doctor see some therapeutic goal on the patient, then common goal, which is end in the social integration. So basically what we are trying inside of this process is really to target groups, to target professionals, to work closely with them, and to bring as much as possible recovery-oriented drug policies, which will end in the number of people that will be recovered, and that will be like coronavirus contagious. So this is our goal, and we see it's working. So
can you also tell the audience something more about the identified needs and also the response to that needs?
Yes, we identified that that inside of different institutions they are working, as I said, in isolation, and through that we organize as much as possible multidisciplinary meetings, teams, and tried to sit together and develop some common goals. So basically, what I saw there, I have it here on presentation. I will just read it because I don't have so much time. There's some challenges of the multidisciplinary approach here in the Balkan area. First, we said that nobody can come into addiction alone. Yeah? You need peers, and you cannot recover alone. You need support. Basically, so then we heard from David that there are people in early recovery until 1 year, people in the stable recovery after 5 years. But for example, people who are visiting our organization, and they are in early recovery, so until 1 year. Somehow, if we identify some more needs in them and want to send them to some other institutions, for example, somebody have a mental health problems, so we want to send them to some doctor, or we see that somebody is lacking of the voluntary activism, we want to send them to some other NGO. Those people, so until 1 year of in early recovery, don't want to go nowhere else. This is their goal. So we came to you, and really this is everything what we can do, and please don't send us nowhere. So basically, when we are speaking about ghettoizing people in the treatment, basically somehow the institutions are sometimes ghettoizing people, but also somehow life in addiction is ghettoizing them. So in the early recovery, they want to be only in one place. Only in one place. So basically, then we also see that when we've been on the different meetings and wants to work multidisciplinary, nice stories in the meeting. Institutions are answering very properly and are very interesting. So basically, they, like David said, are recognizing that they are also working some good stuff. But after the meetings, it's a then problem. So less institutions and CSOs are responding and want to continue. So we are really lacking of how to develop it. So when we recognize that somebody wants to work with us, we are lacking on how to develop different systems. Also, it's really hard to ensure for how to provide for the people who are seeking drug-free life to become support and to support them in realizing that goal. For example, we have a helpline here in our organization, like in Montenegro, like in Serbia. So when the people calling on helpline or getting service when they are coming for the motivational interview, when they are coming to connect with us, we always ask them, why you came, why you called us. Why is that happened? So basically, big number of people answered, not I came here to learn how to live my life as an addict. Nobody answered, you know, okay, I came here or I called you, you know, because I want to know how to properly find my wean, because I don't have them, you know, how to use clean needles. Nobody said that. Nobody said. So people said, I called you because I want finally to finish with this, what I'm doing in my life. So basically they want to recover. And this is something what we are presenting in front of faces of professionals. When they come to you, they want what they want. What are you providing to them? So basically, we want to ask those professionals, if the people are coming to your organization, to your institution, and ask you to be a drug-free, is that only a wish that you cannot follow and support? Is that only utopia? And we will provide them some medicaments until the end of their lives. Nothing against it, but it's the other part of the story. Or you will give all kinds of support from your institution or maybe some other institution to achieve their potential maximum. So this is really hard to ensure that they are getting what they want. Also, greater understanding when we talk in between harm reduction and recovery. We are on the good path, let's say, in Balkans. Before we've been seen only like rivals. So I've been accused several times that I've been taking people from methadone and putting them into the rehab centers, and people been going out after 7 days. And do I know how much damage I could cause if they overdosed? So I think now it's after years of sitting together, and especially last 3 years, or maybe 5, when we gain on credibility through the different scientific research on recovery. Because before, I think the people treated us professional, treated us more as some experience experts. But now, behind our experience, it's not only what we lived through our lives, now it's also something scientifically. So basically now there is no reason to be rivals. And really, I see the good common ground to sit together with the doctors, professionals, and to talk about how to integrate, how to be more inclusive, like David said. And I think this is also something what is challenge, but I think we are in a good ground to leave that all challenges behind us and to do work good that will help people to achieve full recovery.
Yes, advocating for recovery has really been successful and somewhat challenging job, but also I want to ask you about the media campaigns. What did you do and what are the outcomes?
Of course, we needed to raise awareness about what we are doing. When we target it, when I say in the beginning, we do the target groups. Who are our target groups? Of course, people who have a problem with addiction. So basically, we saw that it's not easy anymore just to, in your city, have your name on some lists and people will come to your organization and ask for help. We did really a huge media campaigns. Starting from the different web pages, TV sessions, etc., and really started to put that is time to call, and that was something that we announced through the period of the last 5 years. So it's time to call, and it's time to do the first step to call our organization that we can help you, and we established the helpline. So in all 3 countries, and this is unique helpline. It's anonymous. It's free of charge. So whoever has a problem with the drug abuse, or somebody in the family has a problem with drug abuse, can call that helpline. The people will respond in the different countries. So basically, we put on the website different things. We put a lot of things in the like on the website, like what is the misuse of different drugs, etc. So through the different media channels, we try to announce it as much as it could be. And on the end, after I have some statistics, I cannot show it now, but I'm free to share it with you whenever. We have some statistics that in the last 28 months, so more than 2 years, our services decreased 8 times more. So basically why? We put a lot in the media that we are the only service providers that you can call it, etc., because we are lacking on that, how to come to the addicts now, where they are all. This is not 80s that we have scenes in the town or on the 90s, or the things changed, you know. So even the drug addicts don't look like 10 years ago. From the other side, it was a question. Now, who will call us? Who is calling us? Who is in the need? And then we saw that 50% of all calls or services inside of our NGO, we are giving to the parents, to the family members. So when I spoke on the beginning, we need to target groups and to identify needs. It was identifying once, but now through our databases and through our research, like life in recovery research that David also mentioned, now we have a new need assessment. And now we see, for example, parents are very important. We knew it before. Parents are very important in the recovery process. We need to involve them as much as possible. Then we see that drug scene is different than it was 3 or 4 years ago. Now are amphetamines in Bosnia and Herzegovina the main reason why people are calling our helpline? Where is the response for the amphetamines? They are for sure not in the public institution which is giving methadone treatment. So basically now we need to act and to respond on the different data that we collected through this last 3 years that we established the helpline, and since we make our substance abuse counseling center bigger with more people working. So media gave us more space and more publicity, and those publicity is not that we are bigger organization or with more announced, that the people are more responding and answering on their needs.
Thank you, Boro. And I also want to say that in conclusion, it's not really about professionals and it's not about the person. They can go only as far as the society will support them. And we hear all these stories about journalists bleating and using language. I also want Boro to tell us more about the study of the public opinion and the stigma that we also conducted as a part of our project, and to tell us more about the huge amount of stigma and social distance and exclusion that people really have and have to face on a daily basis in Balkan society.
Yes, drug addiction and drug users and people in recovery are always stigmatized. And I think the percentages are everywhere a little bit similar. So when I said about our target group, our third target group, it's a public. So basically everybody. And we did 2 public opinion researches in these 3 countries with 3,000 people, and we asked them basically what they are thinking about recovery. Is that possible? We asked several questions like if your neighbor is a person with addiction history, what do you think about that? Or would you accept somebody with a drug addiction history in recovery as a babysitter or somebody who is in relation? So the answer being really not so positive. I don't want to go into the numbers now, but when I see that we have difficulties in front of us, basically, if we even want to establish recovery-oriented systems of care, we have a lot of different ideologies that are in front of us. Professionals are not always same opinion. What is the goal for the people who are using drugs? From the other side, we have a knowledge that the recovery process and recovery champions are also contagious, and that if we are investing enough into the multi-sectorial work, so basically that the people gain help here sport activities, going into rehab center, coming back, be employed in some social entrepreneurship, companies, NGOs, hobbies, voluntarily. So eventually they can develop and come to some phases in their life where they will be stigmatized anymore because their addiction or recovery. So basically, we have a lot of obstacles, like also in the public, there is a huge, let's say, not uninterested thing. Addiction is not so here now, Balkan region, so interested topic. You know, when you start to talk about addiction with people, they are very on distance. It will not happen to me. It will not happen. I don't have nobody there. So when you speak even with the people who work a little bit with that, like social workers who are working in the public institutions, and maybe one drug addict is coming in their office in the half of the year. So when we are starting to talk with them, we see stigma. So we have hard work in front of us. We need to help people as much as we can. We need to talk with the professionals in the way to create recovery-oriented systems of care, because without that, everybody is doing own job, and we can not refer nobody to somewhere where we will not see the same goal, and that is integration. And then on the end, we have a stigma in public. So we can do whatever we want. But for example, when they want to be employed somewhere, they have a history of drug addiction, maybe they will not get the job. So what with that? So basically, it's a hard work in front of us, but we are trying. We are trying with our partners and with everybody, but it's available. Let's say it's available. After the whole work, when you see one person who called your phone that you established, and when you see that some organization that you referred those clients is responding and sending a report about them, and when you see that after 2 years some person came back to your organization and say, okay, now my life looks differently, and you ask how differently, you are like under question, you see, you recognize those eyes, because those eyes 2 years before been looking in the floor, and now those eyes are looking into you. There is no shame anymore. So this is a goal, that the people are walking with dignity, so I'm now repeating that dignity from beginning, walking in dignity and trying to reach their maximum potential. So basically, when we see one person who is doing that, it's great. It's great. We succeeded, because we know that person, when it comes back to their neighborhood, it's not stealing anymore. Their parents or wife or whoever, it's proud on them. And those persons are not stealing, and neighbors are not closing door anymore in front of them. They are opening door. And the whole picture of what is drug addiction, it's a little bit changing. And starting not to be so marginalized and not to be so judgmental, then start to be more supportive and start to be eventually with a look into the future with more dignity and help, and on the end, living without drugs.
Okay, thank you, Boro. And I think that this idea of supporting recovery is not just to help people get better, but rather to make the places we live better places to live. And that's what makes it wonderful and makes it contagious. So it's been an absolute pleasure to have you all as our guests here today. And I know that everybody who was watching and who will watch this is going to be desperate for more about what we can do to implement these activities in future for everyone in recovery, and to really make sure that people are living a better lives. And so I want to just tell everybody who has to go, it's okay, but who wants to stay, we have a couple of questions for our speakers, and Regina will try to be as fast as possible, and Boro and Alexander can answer a couple of questions, and if anybody has some additional inquiries, as Linda said, they can send to info or anybody here present. So Regina, can you please just read out the questions?
Yes, thank you. We have a question for Alexander and Boro. saying that for the past few years, especially from 2013, the death and illicit trafficking of fentanyl and fentanyl analogs, including novel fentanyl. I wrote this in the chat for Alexander and Boro to see as well as pharmaceutical and non-pharmaceutical drugs have significantly increased and affected different parts of the world. Do we have any particular method or strategies to deal with particular drug addiction or withdrawal symptoms? And especially then with synthetic opioids. So Boro or Alexander, you can unmute yourself and answer. Thank you.
I'm trying to answer those questions from my experience, but really in the Balkan region, we don't have experience with fentanyls. And I would not like to answer on something, you know, that is far away, like in America or something like that. So other question is for me more relevant. If you can say in front of all, or and I will try to give an answer on the second question from Amy Rumshausen. This is. Or do you want to read it, Regina, or
maybe you can just summarize her question?
Okay, the question was that in their home city in America, Amy asked that they have a lot of recovery-oriented organization and projects, but they are working in isolation of each other. Like, what is that? This is really, really good question. So basically, I don't think that scientific people can answer on that. I think only people in recovery can answer on that. There is a one good thing in the one thing I don't want to say which is good, is that good or not in the life of people in recovery. Okay, in the recovery process, just to explain it, you basically leave your life behind, yeah, and you get the new values. And as this is such a huge difference between your life before and the life now, because this was disaster and here it's a victory, yeah, you are living every day in that. For you, this victory is the best value that is possible in your life. So your life is built, if it's not built on the NA principles, those principles are everything. If this is built on your mentor, you know, who gives you advices, this mentor is a God, who whatever is he saying is for you personally is the best thing. If you came out through the Bible reading, those Bible readings and verses are, you know, everything. So basically, I'm just telling you in the different recovery paths that are different, but basically same values that gave you basically this basement where you are standing now, and that gives you basically that everything what is in your life. On those values, many organizations create those their services. So NA, you have a lot of groups, you have a different Christian groups, you have a different therapeutic communities, you have a different programs, etc., etc., and everybody thinks my program is the best. And this is a problem that we are facing also here in the Balkan region for years. But I'm thinking through the sitting together and really creating what is our common goal, because our common goal should not be our program. And our program needs to have some data that shows us also challenges of our program. I think when the people grow inside of their organizations, NGOs, whatever they are doing in the recovery, and start to be enough smart to think it's not only about my organization, it's really about people who are using drugs and people in recovery, those people will sit with us together, and they are sitting currently with us, and still, even they are sitting currently with us, they still speak own ideologies that will not help, not even them, not even us, not society, but they are sitting together with us, and we are trying to go out of our services and try to see the bigger picture. And the bigger picture is helping everybody to reach their full potential. So I cannot measure all addiction, people who have a problem with addiction, about myself. So I cannot measure it because I'm a person who developed on this way. Maybe somebody else don't have enough support, enough everything to be same like me. So I don't want to measure people like how I did. Basically, I think this is a problem inside of different recovery organizations, and the platforms sitting together, not be judgmental inside of recovery organization. People, a lot of people are judgmental to the professionals. They are saying we do not to work closely with them or whatever that is. So this is not also truth. We need to work closely on them because you cannot solve all problems. I saw many people who've been really good inside of a rehabilitation center where we've been together, me and Alexander, for example. So basically, when you look in them, all that fruits of recovery been very visible. But some places in their lives, like some trauma from the childhood, was never touched there. So basically, we need more people to work with that people in recovery. So not only in the rehab center, they learn how to new values, how to work, etc., etc., etc. But nobody ever touched the trauma. And on the end, this trauma from the childhood was the cause for the relapse. So when we are talking like that, you know, that people in needs are different and big. When we are talking about that and like that, I think we will bring more organization and recovery together with a common goal. That will be not only my organization is the best and we know how to do it and don't tell me. And I heard a lot of things through this 20 years of working with people, you know, then really to be, you know, to respect each other and to give a really priority to the persons who we are dealing with and not to the organizations. So people are important, and people in addiction, people in recovery. So not organizations so much. I hope that answers Amy.
Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today, and thank you, Mulka, for organizing this and having a thread through all the presentation, and Alexander and Boro and David, thank you so much for your contribution. We have passed 2 o'clock, and we said that we will hold at 2 o'clock, and I see that people have already left. We have no problem in keeping this channel open for a couple of minutes more if there are people who wants to ask a question live here. Otherwise, as I said before, I see you, Chris. I will give the floor to you in a minute. Otherwise, as I said before, you are very welcome to send any kinds of comments and questions to us afterwards, and we especially welcome ideas for webinars in the future, of course. And if you want to leave, feel free to do so. I guess that people already done that, but we can say that this meeting is closed for those who want to leave, because I know that we all have schedules. Some of us have a little more flexible schedule these days than other times, but feel free to do what you want. And thank you so much for your participation so far. If you want to leave, and I saw that Chris raised his hand like this. There is also a function that you can raise your hand, or you can write in the chat if you want to say something. But Chris, please.
Thank you. You can hear me now, right? Yeah. I really want to appreciate Boro and Alexander for that fantastic presentation, and David too. I think the issue of celebrating persons who must have gone recovery is a very important aspect of this discussion. For me, is a take home, because our society creates a very big, huge barrier. You know, when people are coming from recovery, integration becomes a very big problem, and that gives even further exclusion, taking them back into depression and other psychological issues. So I think I will consult with Boro on how to replicate that celebrating recovery, persons of recovery in Lagos, because that is our epicenter. Okay, going to David, I asked, is there any city in Africa that has been considered as a recovery city? And what determines this city to be called a recovery city? Thank you.
Do you want, Boro, do you want to answer on this, or should? Okay, well, I think what David tried to say earlier is that there are no like clear measurements or no like certification on cities to become a recovery city. I have been to a couple of places in Africa where I know that there are, and WFAD has several members in the African continent, and some of you are present here today that are working very hard to promote recovery, to support recovery, and so on. And I think that the main idea of recovery cities is to try to find some kind of partly support from other persons from other places to find support and inspiration on how to do it, because it's basically is built on trying to find the resources that are already there, trying to connect the recovery movements around the city and trying to not to work in isolation but to connect together to be stronger and create synergy from these different institutions and NGOs, both from the civil society and from the public sphere. And I think that is one of the key areas to try to do that. There is like no limitation at all in starting the work, because as David also mentioned, one part of it is to make recovery visible. And that I know for sure that several organizations around the world and on the African continent are doing. So, but from that, I think what the network that David is trying to pull together is mainly from European cities. I mean, it's Ghent, it's in the Balkans, it's where I live in Gothenburg, and also from UK cities. But there is like no limitation. You are very free to contact us, and David is super supportive with all his knowledge and all the theoretical background and support you can get from him. So, but then there are, as always, there are different challenges from place to place, both from within the country, from within the continent. So there are different circumstances, and the key part is to start building from what you have and not trying to build from something existing in Gothenburg, but you have your resources and you have plenty of connectors and local heroes where you are from also, and you have to try to identify those and start building from them. I think. Was that a good enough answer, Chris? Do Boro, Mulka, or Alexander wants to fill in?
Yeah, I also wanted to mention that we started the conversation with our lovely lady from Cape Town. So maybe that will be interesting for you if this develops in the right direction. And they're also doing a wonderful job there, and some recovery stuff is happening. I also know they have recovery walks and the recovery festivals. But the key stuff about recovery cities and about what we are doing also in the Balkans is to connect everybody. So many organizations, many institutions, they are doing a wonderful job. But as Amy also said, they are not communicating, they are not sharing the knowledge and the experience and skills. And our aim is to connect everybody and to work together. So this is like kind of multidisciplinary and multi-sector approach to not only drug addiction problem, but also many accompanying problems like health-related, mental health-related, homelessness, youth, gender, so but affected by drugs or by other people drug use. So I think maybe if we organize something in Cape Town, you can join, and that could be the new notion of recovery in Africa.
Thank you so much. Are there any other questions, comments? Anyone wants to share something?
Okay, then we can close the webinar, and thank you everybody for joining us and for staying half an hour later. And as Linda said, we are looking forward to some feedback and for your emails. Have a nice day and take care and stay safe, stay home. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone. Thanks so much. Good to
Bye-bye.
see you.